Hare Krishna, please accept my obeisances. My name is Jita Girish Das, disciple of His Holiness Bhaktivikas Maharaj. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivikas Svaminiti Namane Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Svaminiti Namane Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Pucharine Nirvishesha Shinuvadi Pashtati Deshatarine Om Jnanat Mirantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So, this is Suresh Prabhu requested me to speak a little bit about my life and how I came to Krishna consciousness, and I hope this doesn't serve as any sort of way for me to glorify myself, but rather I hope this is something devotees can listen to and maybe get some inspiration, and hopefully I can glorify Srila Prabhupada and my own Guru Maharaj's Padita Pavana for giving me this opportunity to practice Krishna consciousness. And you guys can kind of see where I'm coming from. And yeah, so I'll just start. My birth name is Joseph McGill. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I lived in Atlanta my whole life, and then that's also where I joined the ashram, the Krishna Life ashram, and became a brahmachari. I grew up Catholic, relatively middle class, in a neighborhood called Candler Park, if anybody's aware of that. My parents were pretty strict. I was the first child, the first of 4 children, so I have 3 younger siblings. And my parents, I think they tried especially hard with me, and then like as their other children grew up, my siblings, it kind of laxed a little bit in parenting, but when I was little, I was allowed only 30 minutes of TV time per day. And you know, all my friends growing up, they would play video games all day, watch TV all day, but my parents were very strict. They always wanted me to play outside. They barely allowed me to eat sweets. We had a safe in the house where my mom would lock up all the chocolate and all the candy. Halloween, you could only get 2 little pieces per day. So you know, my parents were pretty strict with health, and yeah, I didn't grow up eating all these Lay's chips and all that stuff. But of course, I would go to my friends' houses and really devastate their whole pantry. So anyways, this just illustrates how there's bad influences in the age of Kali, but even though parents may try, like my parents tried to get me away from this unhealthy stuff, still it had an effect on me, and I was always craving that stuff. I was in Boy Scouts. Maybe in like 2nd grade, I started, Cub Scouts, and then I did Boy Scouts up until 8th grade. So from ages, I don't know what that is, ages 8 to 13 or something, I was in Boy Scouts, and we would always go on hiking trips and go camping, like, what do they call it, primitive camping, where you have no running water, no, obviously you're staying in tents, cooking for yourself. So I was really into that. I really liked camping. I liked living in nature. Another thing was my dad is a musician. He plays bass, like bass guitar, upright bass, and he plays piano, and he's got perfect pitch. So he wanted me to be a musician. So when I was in 1st grade, maybe around 7 years old, they got me a drum kit for Christmas, I remember, and I would play that thing all the time. So yeah, I really liked playing drums, and then when I got to the age of maybe 9 or something, they got me an upright bass, a double bass, and so I started playing bass. I took bass lessons for a while. So yeah, that was a big part of my life, music, and of course, I was always listening to music. So yeah, fundamental part of my life. So, of course, I had bad influences. I went to public school. I took public schooling. And most of my friends, at least in my immediate friend group, all of my friends, this is in elementary school, they were brought up with atheistic parents. So my parents, we were Catholic. My parents believed in God, but they weren't like super crazy religious. I would go to church once a week, on Sundays, and, very, sit through the mass, and it was very boring, and then you get like a little wafer, and you drink a little wine at the end, and that's like, you're just hankering for that little bit of food the whole mass. But yeah, I really didn't like going to church. And then as I had the influence of these atheistic friends, I was a kid, so I didn't think too much about it. It's like, my friends are telling me there's no God, okay. My friends say there's no God, there's no God. And so that's where I kind of was. I was just young. I wasn't mature enough to make intelligent decisions or anything. But yeah, and then I would go to Sunday school also, and I remember maybe when I was about 10 years old, I was really like challenging the teachers and, openly propagating the idea that God doesn't exist at Sunday school, which is very like, that's totally against their lesson plan for the day, but I would just like kind of be a nuisance in that way. But yeah, factually they couldn't give any legitimate arguments for the existence of God. It was all just, we believe in Jesus because Jesus is our Savior, and if we don't believe in Jesus, we'll go to hell. And so that was the whole thing, and I wasn't into that from a very young age. And like I said, that was mostly just due to my association of my friends who were atheists. And then what to speak of also, in public school in general, we're taught atheistic things. So that constructs our whole worldview. Yeah, so as I got a little older, I really wasn't into school either. I never failed a class or anything, but I was always, just doing the bare minimum, just trying to get by. And I would get into a lot of trouble. I was quite rebellious. And then I got into skateboarding when I was maybe like 11 years old. And then from age 11 to maybe age 19, skateboarding was like a big part of my daily life, and then a big part of my identity also, my false ego. So yeah, around in middle school, I started skating a lot and hanging out with the wrong people, and eventually I got into, taking some intoxication. And again, this is all the stories of a fallen soul. So a lot of this is a little embarrassing for me to say, but I first started doing drugs when I was about 13, which was at the beginning just smoking cannabis and tobacco also. So I started doing that, and that's just because the people I was hanging out with were doing that. People at the skate park, and then people in, the older kids who were in high school. So I just kind of fell into that social circle. So yeah, I was getting intoxicated, and I was really not into school. And then from cannabis, marijuana, came other things. Like I was doing Xanax sometimes, and all these other things. But then I started getting into psychedelics, which kind of changed everything for me. It was a transformative experience, undoubtedly. Definitely not a spiritual transformation, but a material transformation, which contextually was better. Contextually, it was good for me, where I was before I was doing psychedelics and where I was after. I remember I had this really crazy episode in the summer of 2016. So I was 15 years old, and me and my friends, we did like a bunch of, we got really intoxicated and on psychedelics and other things. And it was just a really crazy experience, like throwing up, couldn't fall asleep, just kind of like super, super intoxicated to the point where it's unbearably, it's like torture. Just like the mind just goes absolutely crazy, and you can't you can't even deal with it at that point. And so I remember just like really suffering, and and then I remember during that experience thinking, what if my mom saw me like this? And that really made me go, whoa, she'd be very upset. And that was kind of an indication to me that I was not at a good place in my life. That was like really one of the first times I took a step back and saw that I was not on a good path. Now, previous to this experience, I was doing psychedelics and I was becoming so-called woke and spiritually awakened. And by the way, psychedelics did kind of help me understand that there's more to life than just material reality, that there's some sort of higher reality, there's some sort of spiritual, subtle something. It just gave me a little glimpse that, okay, there's something beyond just, eating food, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So, yeah, back to the point of, going to school but not being into it, doing psychedelics. I remember just sitting in the class and being absolutely miserable, just head down all the time in class, not doing the work, cheating everything, skipping classes, going to the park across the street with my friends and smoking and then coming back, and just really not being into it. And on one hand, I was living like the typical, stereotypical teenage life of being carefree and doing wild stuff and partying and having a great time. So in one sense, that time of my life was fun like that. But in reality, I was in a really dark place because I remember just sitting in the classroom and just thinking, why do I have to go through this? And the things that they're teaching me have no practical application in my life, but I'm forced to sit in this place for 8 hours a day and just regurgitate information. And it's all like they're just trying to make me a robot, and I'm like in a factory, being prepared to go sent to the slaughterhouse of the working world. And I just had a very negative view towards the whole thing. So I had the very negative view towards the educational system and material life like that, but then I combated that by just being totally wild and doing drugs and skipping school, which was not the solution. I was in a very miserable place, and my mom saw this, and both my parents were present throughout my life, and they never got divorced or anything, but particularly the mother is in a sense more dear to the child, especially in the teenage years. The father's kind of distant because his son is like is a boy, kind of a man, so it's like, how do I interact with him? It's a little bit of an awkward time between the son and the father, at least in my experience. But anyways, my mom especially saw that I wasn't in a good place. I was hanging out with, other kids who were similarly not in a good place, and so she decided to transfer schools. So I went to Grady High, which now is called Midtown High. It's the high school across from Piedmont Park. And then she transferred me to Decatur High School for my junior and senior years. And so she transferred me there, and I didn't really have any friends at Decatur. I was kind of a loner. And before I moved to Decatur High, the summer in between my sophomore and junior years, was when I had this experience of when I said me and my friends, we got together, we got a bunch of drugs, and it was a really terrible experience. So that was kind of a transformation for me, is moving high schools, changing my friend group. And at that point, because I realized I was in such a dark place, I made more of an attempt to live more healthy. So just eating healthier. I was getting into yoga, just, hatha yoga. And I had a growing appreciation for nature. So that was also another big thing, was appreciation for nature. At that point, up until that point, I was listening to all electronic dance music and trap, like Lil Yachty and Playboi Carti and all those kind of people that were famous when I was in like 9th and 10th grade. But then I went through this kind of transformation where I started to really despise that kind of music, and I started just listening to jazz and folk and bluegrass and all acoustic music, and then some like classic rock also. But I really like got away from. I had some sort of sense that, but I didn't even know what Kali Yuga was. But I had some sense that all this modern advancement is not good for us. I gave up my cell phone, my smartphone. I had like an Android smartphone, and I gave it up and I got a flip phone because I realized Instagram was, particularly Instagram, but also YouTube and Snapchat, really had messed up my psychology. And I'd become a slave to these apps. So I started to lean toward a more natural lifestyle, and I also stopped with all the heavy drugs, and I was only smoking weed and taking mushrooms, which still was not good for my mind, but it was a little better. So even though I was trying to live a better life, I was still struggling with addiction. Also, caffeine was a big addiction for me. I would even drink, and I would drink like 2 cups of coffee minimum per day. And then sometimes even like a whole French press. I would like drink it throughout the morning. And that's kind of how I grew up. My parents, big coffee drinkers also. I think for most people in this day and age, that's an issue. But I was always taking uppers and downers and trying to like find the sweet spot. But the whole thing is just suffering. And so yeah, I was struggling with this, particularly smoking weed and drinking coffee, which is not like, it's definitely not the worst of addictions, but still it was a problem for me. And of course, smoking weed makes you lazy. It makes you eat way too much. It just makes you moded out. It's mode of ignorance, pure tamagun. And then sometimes rajagun, but mostly just tamagun, as we know now. But yeah, I recognized that these things weren't good for me. I was trying to get away from them, but it seemed impossible. Mainly because all of my friends, my whole social circle it revolved around skateboarding and taking intoxication. And then I also had other friends who were more like philosophical and musical and that kind of stuff. But drugs was the underlying factor in all my social circles. So it seemed nearly impossible to get away from intoxication. So yeah, I graduated high school, and then I went to college, Georgia State University. So I stayed living at my parents' house, which is, not too far from downtown Atlanta. And I did it very half-heartedly. I went to college. I wasn't passionate in studies, but at the same time, I knew that I didn't want to just end up being a bum on the street, as we are taught to be scared of thinking when making the decision to go to school or not go to school. So I was like, yeah, okay, fine, I'll go to school because I don't know what else to do. My parents were pushing it. society was pushing it, and I just kind of surrendered to that. And I didn't know what my major was yet. And my Guru Maharaj describes this, how when he was, when he, in his transcendental pastimes, when he was younger and they were giving him all the list of things you could do in pursuing education and pursuing careers, he looked at all of them and, plumber, engineer, doctor, dentist, looked at all of them and it just all seemed unappealing. But you have to pick one of these things and do it for the rest of your life. And similarly, I also felt that way. How I was trying to decide what I wanted to study in school, and I was seeing all these topics, and it all just sounded so boring, especially like anything to do with economics or business. I really just dreaded all that. So I ended up picking sociology. I thought it was interesting, and I had somewhat of a desire to help society, because I knew society was not in a good place. So in my immaturity, I thought becoming a sociologist was the solution, and that's how I could make my life a productive contribution. But of course, the stuff they teach in sociology is completely nonsense. The vast majority of it. It's all just completely speculated theories. Of course, there's some sociological, theoretical knowledge which is bona fide that they teach, but most of it's just complete speculation, which I didn't really come to accept until I came to Krishna consciousness, and I saw things from a different perspective. But so yeah. Anyways, I was half-heartedly in school, but actually my passion at the time was music. Back in high school, back when I was going to Grady High, in sophomore year, I formed a band. I was in the jazz band in high school, so I was always playing drums. So I formed a band with some friends, and we called ourselves Brother Moon, and we just for a few years we just kind of played in my friend's dad's studio. We just played around and wrote songs and just had fun like that. But eventually, especially after I finished high school, we were playing gigs around Atlanta, different venues, parties. We had some friends who were in fraternities in Athens, Georgia, University of Georgia, and they would hire us to go play there for their fraternities. We play in pubs and breweries and that kind of thing, and then we even went on to record some things professionally. There's 5 songs that are out there, but yeah. Anyways, music wasn't all so good, but anyways, I was really into that. I was really into music. But as I got a little bit older, maybe around age 17, I started to play guitar, and I started to not just appreciate playing drums, but I started to appreciate, melodies and chord structures, and I developed a passion for writing music, and I like to write poetry, and so that was a growing material desire for me, was to be some sort of band leader or songwriter, Paul McCartney kind of virtuoso, all these things that all of us want to be. But yeah, I had this burning desire to write music. So I also introduced some songs that I wrote to the band, but they weren't so receptive to that because I was just the drummer, and that's kind of the stereotype of being the drummer, is you're just kind of that stupid guy that likes to party and can really hold it down on the drums. But when it comes to singing or writing songs or something, just complete neophyte. Just in the Muppets, there's the character, the animal. So that's kind of the archetype of the drummer. So I was kind of pushed into that box, and I didn't like that because I wanted to be a leader of the band. I wanted to write songs for the band. I wanted to propagate my glories throughout the world as a songwriter. So that was like a growing material desire for me. When I was in college, in downtown Atlanta, His Grace Balabhadra Bhattacharya Prabhu, who's a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, he does Harinam in downtown on Peachtree Street, which is on the Georgia State campus. So he does Harinam there. And when I was in college, I think this is, as far as I can remember, this is my first interaction with Krishna consciousness. Maybe besides listening to My Sweet Lord by George Harrison, which I'd probably heard before, but I didn't really, Hare Krishna never stood out in my mind. I never really knew about it. But anyways, when I was in college, one day I just walked by Balabhadra Bhattacharya Prabhu's Harinam, and I saw the devotees chanting, and they were passing out some small books. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, I liked meditation, and I liked yoga, and I was like, okay, sure, yeah, I'll take a book. And I was a little appreciative of that. Yeah, these people are meditating. They're doing some like ancient kind of ancient practice. So I took a small book, and on the train back home, I just like flipped through it a little bit, and none of it really like grasped my attention. None of it hit home for me, so I kind of just like was like, okay, whatever. It's not the book for me, and I don't know what happened to that book. I might have even thrown it away. Sorry, but that's where I was at. So that was my first interaction with Krishna consciousness. Fast forward to the year 2020. I think I was finishing my freshman year in college is when COVID hit in 2020. So for most people, when COVID hit, that was like the worst thing, like the low of people's lives, and certainly it was a scary time for everybody. Even though maybe the issue is maybe blown a little out of proportion, but still, it was a very scary time. I remember the grocery stores were running out of toilet paper like anything, and everybody was singing, "Oh my God, how are we gonna wipe our behinds?" Yeah, really kind of ridiculous. But I remember in March of 2020, or maybe I think it was March. It was right when COVID was hitting, right at the beginning of the quarantine. Me and my friend, we did ayahuasca together, which is, for those that don't know, it's like a medicine from South America. I say medicine with quotations because it's very intoxicating, and it can have some materially healing effects, but there's also risk of completely losing your mind and becoming schizophrenic. And that whole realm of discussion is controversial amongst devotees, probably, that psychedelics could be at all good for you. But anyways, at the time, when it comes to my material situation, psychedelics help me compared to, my psychology before taking psychedelics. Taking them helped me materially. So anyways, I had like a breakthrough experience on ayahuasca, and which means, confronting death, kind of like losing the fear of death, and going through that whole shebang. For those that know, they know. For those that don't know about that, you're not missing out on anything, because hopefully you have Krishna consciousness. But yeah, 2020, I had that breakthrough, and then that was like the best year of my life, materially speaking. That was the topmost enjoyment once COVID hit, because I didn't have to go to school, and then I met this girl, and then I got into a relationship with her, and we went like camping all the time, and hiking, and she was a musician, so we were always playing music and writing poetry and stuff, and that whole enchantment. So that was that time of my life. It was like the best time of my life, materially speaking. And then my band also, we were playing a lot of gigs, and it was just like one of the, maybe you look back on it as a good time in some sense. But later on in that year in 2020, SHIT really started to hit the fan. So I was, at the peak of material enjoyment, at least in my experience, and then my experience on this earth. And then just completely hit rock bottom. I mean, it was a little bit gradual, but I eventually just completely hit rock bottom. A few things happened. I was 19 at the time. So I guess the first thing I'll say, what happened is I got kicked out of the band, which I'd been in for like 4 years or something by that time. And, like I said, I was trying to take more of a position of being a leader of the band, of having my songs played, having my ideas heard, which as a drummer is not something that really happens. So I was really pushing for that. I was like pushing my role, and they weren't appreciating that because obviously all of them had their different ideas of where they wanted the band to go. And I was trying to pull it in this different direction. And so they sat me down and they were like, look, this isn't the place for you. Okay, whatever, screw you guys. Been friends for 4 years, and then you just kind of just kick me away. Because you can't accept my dreams. And anyways, all of y'all are wannabe John Mayers. So you don't have much hope anyways. That was kind of my whole mentality. So I was just kind of like, screw you. But in the back of my mind, I was actually really hurt by that, because these have been my good friends for a while. So anyways, that happened, and that was a little rough for me. And then my grandma passed away, which, I mean, she was at her old age, and it wasn't surprising that she passed away, but just the whole incident was just sad. It just wasn't very, it just wasn't, it was just a very sad incident where my grandpa, her husband, had died a few years back, and then ever since then she just kind of been a widow, kind of reclusive, just locked away in her condominium, and people were hired to come check in on her and take care of her, get her groceries. We hired all these people to, my dad and his siblings hired all these people to do that for her, but she wouldn't interact with anybody, and she would come to the family reunions for Christmases just like very shortly every year. She didn't want to hug anybody. She always wore a mask. She was super paranoid about getting sick, and she was super paranoid. She was scared of death. I mean, that was really the thing. And so she was at that point in her old age where everybody, all of her peers were just leaving their bodies, and then it just really freaked her out, and to the point where she was just a completely dysfunctional woman who couldn't get over her husband's death. And she would, always listening to the songs that, her and my grandpa had all these cassettes, and she would always listen to those and just like cry about my grandpa. It was just like whole depressing scene. And so she left her body in that state. And I never actually got a chance to know her because she was so just aloof from my life, which I just thought it was just kind of sad. Just simply put, it was just sad. I didn't have a relationship with her, and she just left her body in such a miserable state. And so I remember on her deathbed, she was like kind of like in a coma or something. So I mean, she could hear me, but she couldn't interact at all. And I just told her like, I wish I could have known you more. Just like that. It was just sad, and it was one of my first confrontations with death. And it just wasn't very reassuring or very hopeful. Life in general at this point in my life was just kind of becoming it just seemed like there wasn't much light at the end of the tunnel. And then this relationship I was having with this girl was becoming saturated, and we were getting sick of each other. And so I was kind of entering this dark phase. And then not only was I skateboarding, not only was I big into that, but in my college years in particular, I worked for my dad's friend's renovations company. So I was doing construction work, painting houses, installing doors, that kind of thing, lifting heavy things. So I didn't have good posture, I didn't stretch, and so that combined with skateboarding really messed up my back. It was a gradual deterioration of my back health, of just straining it in improper ways, and eventually it came to the point, like, I really pushed it because skateboarding was like a big part of my identity, and if I wasn't skateboarding, I didn't know like who I was basically. And so I really pushed it to the very point of where, like, okay, I can't walk anymore, I have to address this issue. And I remember that distinctly, like, okay, this is like too bad. I was in so much pain, and I couldn't, like I said, I barely could walk at that point. So that was like October of 2020. So yeah, I basically I became a vegetable at that point, practically speaking. I couldn't even sit. It hurt to sit, it hurt to stand. I could only really lie down. And I could walk around and sit for like very intermittent periods. But I was practically a vegetable. And when you're in such a state, you're not a very fun person to be around. And plus I had this other stuff that was disturbing my mind. And so those who I thought were my friends were really distancing themselves from me because I just wasn't, I guess, that person that they used to know. Or I wasn't fun to be around anymore. I couldn't even go on hikes. I couldn't skateboard. I couldn't walk around the city. I couldn't bike. I couldn't do anything. The only thing I could do at that point was take intoxication, which I certainly took shelter of, and then take shelter of music, like playing music, songwriting, which I really took shelter of at this point. So yeah, basically I had no friends at that point. And then my girlfriend also lost interest in me and expressed interest in someone else, which was hard for me to deal with. And then she lost interest in that person and came back to me, and then we did this whole like back and forth sort of thing that teenagers often do. And it was just completely miserable. Yeah, so this was a period of intense suffering. And at this point, I really took shelter of music. My mom wanted me to, there's this book called The Artist's Way, and it's kind of like it's a self-help book basically, but it's a instructional kind of book on how to help yourself and how to overcome writer's block and how to, how to perfect how to become self-realized as an artist and become self-realized as this body, basically that kind of thing. And so I was writing 2 pages of just free thought every day, and going in the woods and writing music and going through this whole process. And eventually I had all these songs and I wanted to make an album. So I started making an album, and mind you, I had really nobody at the time. My band, the people I was in a band with previously, we were kind of at a distance. And then I had another friend who's very, his name was Joel. He's a very prominent person throughout my life, but he's expert guitar player. And he was like, we were trying to do something, but he wasn't very organized, and so nothing really happened. So eventually I was just like, okay, I'm sick of this. I'm just going to do my own thing. So I got FL Studios on my computer, and I got like a few like some low grade recording equipment, and I even booked a session in some studio, whom I knew the owner of that studio, so I got a deal with him and recorded my drum set in there, and then recorded all the other stuff myself. So I was really into that, and that was like an avenue for me to express all of this pain I was feeling. Not a very inspiring thing to listen to, probably. Anyways, the album's out there. It's called This Project Is My Tissue, and that is a message. The title of that album's a message in itself. I'll just talk about that briefly later. But of course, ultimately, it's all egoism, nonsense. I'm glad I'm not doing that anymore. But yeah, I'm in this period of intense suffering, and then one afternoon I walk with my friend to Piedmont Park, and we were really just aimlessly wandering, as one does when they don't know the purpose of life. And at a we were like playing frisbee, and I wasn't playing much because my back, but I was doing what I could. And we came upon the devotees. I saw at a distance there was a Harinam party. So they were sitting down on a mat. There was some monks sitting down on a mat, and then I think there was like 2 monks who were standing up and passing out literature. And my friend was like, "Oh, that looks interesting. Let's go check it out." And so we start walking over there, and my friend goes, "Oh, by the way, I got to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. I'll meet you over there." And so I go, "Okay." So I start walking over there, and I'm walking towards the devotees. And then one of the book distributors, he points at me and goes, "Oh, man, you look like Jesus." Because I had long hair at the time. He's like, "I like the hair. You look like Jesus, my man. What's up?" And then I'm like, "Yeah, thanks, So, he puts the books in my hand. He puts the Saptarishi stack in my hand. He's like, does the whole thing. Most people give 49. You look like a spiritual genius. You should take these books, perfect, realize your life. And I was like, yeah, yada yada, yeah, right. So I don't want these books. You take them. I'm not giving you any money. He was like, "Okay, that's cool. Well, at least take this one." He puts a bhakta stack in my hand. "Just give whatever you want." I was like, "Okay, fine." So I gave $13 for a stack of 4 books. The softbound Bhagavad Gita, softbound Science of Self-Realization. I think Easy Journey to Other Planets was in there, and then maybe another book, which I can't remember. So anyways, he sold me these books and was like, "Okay, peace out," and then just kind of left, and I was just like standing there with these books, like, okay. I didn't even really want these books, but whatever. Money's already gone. I was pretty stingy. I didn't like to spend money. And anyways, I just standing there with the books, and I'm waiting for my friend because he's using the restroom. But then there's this older man walks up to me, an older monk, and he just starts talking to me. This was His Grace Akiladhar Prabhu, who was a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. And at that time, he was living in ISKCON Atlanta. He was living in some shabby little room in ISKCON Atlanta. And he would often come to the Krishna Life ashram and associate with the brahmacharis and go on books and go on Harinam with them and distribute books. And so anyways, he walks up to me and he just strikes up a conversation. And then my friend comes over and meets us, and he's talking to me, and he just starts explaining about the purpose of life is to love God, is to serve God. And we're in the age of Kali, in the age of quarrel and hypocrisy, and there's so many vices, and we're struggling to maintain our existence, and everything here is temporary, everything's coming and going, and no one is ever satisfied by pursuing material life. But spiritual life, on the other hand, it's like the light at the end of the tunnel, to love God and reestablish our relationship with Him, our lost relationship with Him, as being eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss, and just being a perfect servant in that state. And he was saying all this, talking to me. I was particularly interested in what he was saying. My friend wasn't so interested in what he was saying, but I was, and I think he saw that in me, and so he really like honed in on me. And when I was talking to him, I felt like, wow, this is a real person, a person who has no ulterior motive, no false ego, just straight up talking to me soul to soul. Like, he was looking at me and interacting with me completely on that platform, just seeing that I was a soul. He wasn't seeing my long hair, he wasn't seeing my back problems, he wasn't seeing the kind of shoes that I wore. None of that false ego. I just felt like he had no false ego, and he was interacting with me on such a pure platform. So I was so like entranced by this person, and it was also notable to me how he was actually missing a lot of his teeth, and he clearly like probably hadn't gone to the dentist in years, but he just like was completely aloof from all these mundane things. And when he he kind of like, he was talking to me kind of close, and he was like he was spitting on me a little bit, but like I just like didn't care, because what he was saying was completely transcendental, and I felt like just by interacting with him, he kind of like pulled me up to that platform. And that was really my first experience of being Krishna conscious in any sort of way, at least in this life. I don't know what happened in previous lives. Most likely I was just an animal, judging from my past activities. But yeah, I really felt connected to Akiladhar Prabhu. And he really inspired me, because I actually wasn't so ambitious to become a material success. I mean, I definitely had a strong desire to be praised as a musician. At least I wanted to have an impression in people's minds. I wanted to touch people's hearts like that with music. But as far as like getting rich and going to school, getting a good career, and like having X amount of girls surrounding me, I wasn't so much concerned with that. Of course, I was a complete materialist nonetheless, but just that the idea of renunciation was a little bit attractive to me, and I saw that in Akiladhar Prabhu. So yeah, I'm just looking through my notes just to make sure I don't skip anything. Okay, anyways, yeah. So I was talking to Akiladhar Prabhu, and I knew for a fact that, yeah, this is a divine interaction. This is a divine experience. Mind you, I got the books, and the book distributor that stopped me was Krishna Prasad Prabhu. And all glories to him, no disrespect on his part, but he kind of he distributed books to me in such a way that was kind of just like, okay, here are the books, and now peace out. But which I didn't, if that alone had happened and I didn't talk to Akiladhar Prabhu, I don't know if I'd be here today, because it really helped me to see the living example of a devotee. And I was listening to a discussion between my Guru Maharaj and His Grace Manidhar Prabhu recently, and Manidhar Prabhu was saying it's actually the qualities of a devotee that bring us to Krishna consciousness and keep us in Krishna consciousness. That you can develop all these ideas about how we can preach through yoga, and we could preach through Ayurveda, and all these like intricate plans. But ultimately, what brings people to Krishna consciousness is being inspired by the qualities of the devotees, and being influenced by their mercy, their compassion, their soberness, their graveness rather, and just being inspired by the qualities of the devotee. That's really what helps a person come to Krishna consciousness. So anyways, Avaduta Prabhu, who was another brahmachari at the time at Krishna Life, now he's a householder at Krishna Life. He came up to me in Akiladhar Prabhu and was like, hey, you should come to our Sunday program. And he sent me a text invite for the Sunday Sangha. It was what it was called. Like, okay, sure. So I left, and then my friend, he wasn't very inspired to practice Krishna consciousness or anything. But I was interested, and so I went home that day, and I picked up the Bhagavad Gita. It was the first book I picked. And I started reading. I'd heard about it. I'd heard something about it. I didn't know what it was, but I knew Bhagavad Gita was a book. So I picked it up and I started reading it. Started reading the introduction and then the first chapter. I can't remember. I probably did not get to the first chapter in that first sitting, but it was completely confusing. Typical of Westerners. You see a bunch of names: Dhananjaya, Dronacharya, Dhritarashtra, all the names that begin with D, and all these different names, and you can't keep track of any of it. So it's completely confusing. But I just read it with kind of some faith that, okay, this is something that's ancient and bona fide and deep. So I had some faith that there was something to this process. So I came to the Sunday feast, and I was immediately impressed by how it was such a diverse group of people. At the time, the Krishna Life ashram was in a house on Ponce de Leon Avenue, just down the street from ISKCON Atlanta. That's where the ashram was at that time, and we had 60 people minimum coming weekly, and everybody would cram into the little living room. And then eventually the numbers got up to 100, which made us move, and then we got this church property on Sylvan Road. But anyways, I came to the Ponce ashram, and immediately I walked in the door, and I smelled the incense, and I smelled the pakoras being fried, and I heard the kirtan, and it was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is a good atmosphere. It's a good vibe. And I walked upstairs, and I was impressed that it was such a diverse group of people, because people in the material world, people in Kali Yuga, particularly people of democratic, liberal disposition, they really emphasize trying to be diverse, but the way they institute that and implement that, they institute it. It's all artificial, how they try to implement diversity. On the material platform, naturally, white people hang out with white people, black people hang out with black people. It's kind of just like, just people of different cultures just kind of cling together. That's naturally how it goes, but in Krishna consciousness, people from all different backgrounds get together on a completely, on a platform of reality, of spiritual reality. So that was impressive to me. And also I felt at home there. I felt very welcomed. That they didn't look down on me for having back problems, or it was really hard for my ego to be a disabled person, because I was always an athlete. I was swimming and playing baseball and skateboarding. But I felt no disrespect from them, and they were completely willing to facilitate whatever I needed. I couldn't sit on the floor because of my back, so I had to sit in a chair, and all the devotees would sit on the floor, and they'd get a chair and a table for me to take prasadam, and they'd serve prasadam, and it was just like, wow, I've never been treated like this before. So yeah, it was just a really nice experience. And also I particularly remember Chandanacharya Prabhu talking to me during the Sunday feast, and I said something like, yeah, we're all God, because I had that neo-Mayavad idea that we're all God, everything is just energy, because I'd been doing psychedelics and hanging out with that pseudo-spiritual crowd. But yeah, Chandanacharya Prabhu was willing to argue with me and completely, with no sympathy, defeat all of my ideas. And he was doing so on a very intelligent platform, and it was all backed by this ancient scripture. And so I was like, okay, yeah, there's like really something to this. And immediately when he smashed my ideas, somehow I fortunately just let go of those nonsense ideas. So yeah, so I came to the Sunday feast, and I would come now and again to the Sunday feast. Sometimes I was intoxicated when I came, but most of the time I came sober actually, because I found that when I was sober at the Sunday feast, I was really able to grasp the philosophy more. I wasn't awkward when interacting with people. I was really able to feel at home at the Sunday feast. And then Devavrata Prabhu, he told me, you should come spend the night sometime. And so I came and spent the night, and Devavrata Prabhu took care of me. And so sometimes I would spend the night. Every Tuesday, actually, I would go spend the night there. And I would come for Mangal Arti sometimes even. I would wake up early and go to Mangal Arti. And of course, Devavrata Prabhu, he left sometime after that, went back to Los Angeles, which is where he was based out of at the time. And then Chandanacharya Prabhu took the major role in cultivating me and taking care of me. And so not only I would come to the morning program, but sometimes I would go to Piedmont Park with him. They would go every day for Harinam. And so I would go and do Harinam with them. We'd even do kirtan at the ashram sometimes, and I would distribute books actually. Chandanacharya Prabhu would, basically I would watch him distribute books. I would just be hanging out with him while he distributed books. And then he'd kind of like push me into the sale sometimes and try to get me to do it. And so in this way I got a little taste for book distribution, which is all a very blissful experience. I remember one time that stood out in my mind is like some guy he was on like one of those like hoverboards, like the handleless segways, and he was riding down the street in Piedmont Park, and he just yelled at us, "You guys are a cult, get alive!" And then, and I was kind of like, whoa, but all the devotees that were with me were kind of like, forget this guy. And then Krishna Prasad said, "Are you the guy from Star Wars?" And I just thought that was so funny and so clever. And just seeing how devotees, there's so much opposition in this world to devotees, but just to see how they're aloof from that, I was like, yeah, that's awesome. It was kind of invoked my spirit of like being a revolutionary or something. And it's like, yeah, who cares what anyone else says? We're going to do what's right. But anyways, that's just a little memory that stands out in my mind. So yeah, I would come associate with the devotees. We would even go swimming. They would take me on hikes. We would go, like, all the brahmacharis and then a few of the bhaktas. We would go on hikes and we'd go swimming. And I realized as I was associating with devotees that I didn't have the desire to get intoxicated. I'd been trying for years, actually, to get off of intoxication because I knew it wasn't good for me, but I didn't see any other, I didn't know any other lifestyle. But when I was with devotees, I completely just forgot about all that. And so yeah, like that, all my addiction problems were solved so instantaneously. And obviously prasadam was, I never had anything like the food that they were offering to Krishna and serving at the ashram. So that was a big pull also. It was the best food I ever had. And then I remember sitting one time with all the brahmacharis. I mean, it was probably just one or two brahmacharis. We were hanging out and talking, and the conversation came up about how there's not so many brahmacharis in North America. This is the only sangha I'd ever been in. It was the Krishna Life Brahmacharis, which is like the largest congregation of brahmacharis in North America at the time. And 2021 this was. And they were talking about, yeah, this is like really the only big brahmachari ashram in North America. And I was like, oh, really? I thought you guys were like all over the U.S. They're like, actually, the mood here at Krishna Life of this intense book distribution and, all the things Krishna Life is known for is unique in the world, actually. And hearing this, I realized, wow, I have this rare opportunity to associate with these devotees. And I was just like, I just happen to be in one specific spot in this one universe at this particular time. And it was just such a fortunate situation. So that was a realization with that. So I brought my parents also to the ashram, to the Sunday feast I brought them to. Excuse me. Got a cold. So I brought my parents to the Sunday feast, and my mom is into yoga and meditation, and my dad is like, my parents are very liberal, so they'll pretty much accept just about anything. So they're like, yeah, Krishna consciousness is cool. It's weird, it's different. My son's doing it, that's a little weird, but whatever. That's kind of how they stood. So I took a trip with the brahmacharis to a farm in the Blue Ridge Mountains. This devotee, Shuddha Jiva Prabhu, who's a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, he had a property up there, and he had a few cows and a few bulls, and he was growing some things. And we took a retreat up there. I was the only new guy that came. Actually, there was a bunch of new guys that were supposed to come, but I was the only one that came through and didn't flake out last minute. But anyways, it was a great trip. They had a swimming hole there, a spring, and so we swam, and So we were at Shuddha Jiva Prabhu's farm property, and it was like a retreat. So I came for the retreat, and we went swimming. There was a nice spring water pond, and we went, we got out the canoes, and we were racing, just having a good time. And of course, we were having a lot of classes. All the devotees were giving different classes, and we were reading together and taking prasadam, and I was getting a full immersion of devotee association. And this took place right before I was to begin my junior year of college. And I decided to take, I forgot to mention this, but I was taking a week-long retreat into the brahmachari ashram. Chandan had convinced me, before you fully get back into school, you should stay here for a week and just chant 16 rounds, see what it's like. And I remember right before this retreat, actually, I chanted 16 rounds for the first time, where I'd done some nonsense activities, and I was just feeling super impure and super degraded, and I was like, I just need to chant 16 rounds. So I just chanted from 0 to 16 rounds in one sitting. That was the first time I chanted 16 rounds. And then, shortly thereafter, I went for a week to stay in the brahmachari ashram. And then that weekend, at the end of that week, was when we went to Shuddha Jiva Prabhu's farm. So we're having this retreat, and we're doing a lot of Shravan and Kirtan. And it was a really good experience. The second day of the retreat, though, it was raining. And I love swimming, I love being outdoors, so I wanted to go swimming, but no one else was fired up about it because it was raining. And so I thought, okay, I'll just go by myself. That's okay. I'll just go swimming. And then, I can't remember who it was, maybe Chandan said, no, you can't go swimming. You need to be with somebody. You can't go alone. Something could happen to you. You could drown. And plus, devotees should always be together. We shouldn't go off alone. And I thought, come on, I'm a grown man. I've been swimming my whole life. I've swam by myself before. I've done so many things by myself before. I'm competent to not die. So I just thought that was pretty unreasonable. I completely disagreed with that command to not leave sight of the brahmacharis. And so then that became kind of a big point of tension in my head. and this seems like it was a very small issue, but it was this small issue that really brought me to a point of confrontation of, I guess, my false ego, a confrontation of authority. It brought me to a point of, it brought me to the question of whether I wanted to surrender to Chandan or whether I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. And so even though it was such a small thing of I just wanted to go swimming and they didn't want me to go alone, in my mind it actually was a big, in my development, it was a big, it was like a pinnacle point. So anyways, I decided to just listen to them and not go swimming. And this was, silly as it is, it was very difficult for me to accept some authority, to surrender my freedom, I guess you could say. So I was really bummed out, actually. Maybe not bummed out, but I was really I really realized in that moment that, yeah, I have the tendency to just want to do whatever I want to do. I have the tendency to not follow my authorities, and even though I want to have complete freedom, I want to do whatever I want to do. I just I need some shelter. So I accepted the guidance of them, and I accepted the shelter, and gave up my own personal desire in that circumstance. And that was a big lesson for me. It was slowly understanding what real surrender is. So that was a big point for me. And on the way back from the retreat, we were driving down the highway and we stopped to get some groceries because we would stop at another park on the way back home and take lunch, take just fruits and nuts and peanut butter and whatever else we would buy from the store to take for lunch. And I was I needed to go to the bathroom because we'd been driving for a while, and so I thought, okay, I'll just leave for a sec, go pass water, and then come back out to the van. And so I went by myself into the store, and I hadn't been in the Association of Non-Devotees for a while. I hadn't been, I'd been constantly with the brahmacharis, day in and day out, without even going swimming by myself or anything like that. So I immediately entered this grocery store and could feel the influence of the lower modes of material nature. I remember there was some 80s music, some cheesy kind of Tears for Fears kind of thing, some cheesy 80s music playing in the place, and it's just a grocery store filled with a bunch of old people that probably were, they were younger in the 80s, so they probably connect to this music. And I could just feel these people are just trying to enjoy. I somehow could feel the 80s vibe of people, older people stuck in the past kind of thing, and just kind of reminiscing on their good old days. But those good old days are over, and now they're older and overweight, and material nature just kind of gets us before we think we're done enjoying. And so that was immediately kind of when I entered that grocery store. And then I just see people buying all this crap, buying big things of sodas and chips, and people are clearly not, their bodies are clearly not in a healthy state. Their consciousness is clearly not in a good place, but they're just stuck in the sense gratification of eating junk, listening to 80s music. And so that was a whole vibe in this grocery store. So I go pass water, and then I come back out to the van, and I'm looking at the van from a distance, and I see all the devotees crowding around the van, joking with each other, kind of messing around with each other. and they just looked like so effulgent in such a dark place. And then in that moment, I was like, I really can't wait to be back there. So I walked fast to that van. I was like, whew. It felt like so long just going to the bathroom and coming back, and I felt so relieved to be back in their association. And in that moment, I was like, yeah, this is the kind of people I want to be around. I don't want to be around all these materialistic people. And I want to be like them. I don't want to be like these materialistic people. I don't want to end up, I don't want to end up in my old age listening to the music of my generation, thinking about the good old days, trying to cling on to some temporary, insignificant moment. So we got in the car, and then we drove, and we got to this park where we were to take lunch. And we got all the things, and I started, we offered everything, of course, and everybody started honoring prasadam. And I was sitting next to Mahotsaha Prabhu, and he's a very intense personality and very, very good at convincing people, and very good at, he's the kind of person who you really feel comfortable opening up to. And so he started talking to me, and he told me, you're doing this music, you're doing this school, but you're not happy. Like, it's all, what you're doing is all useless. And at this point, I've been around the devotees enough to understand this. And I agreed with him. I was like, yeah, you're right. And he said, so why don't you move in? Why don't you just give up this nonsense music? Maybe he said, like, you finish your school. Because I did end up continuing to go to school in the brahmacharya ashram. And they incurred the, Vishnu Chitta Prabhu, Mahotsa Prabhu, my authorities. They convinced me to finish my school. So, Mahotsa Prabhu was like, give up this nonsense music. Give up all your nonsense. Try to be a devotee. Live in the ashram. And I was like, that's a big decision, because I knew once I went fully in, there's no coming back. There's no coming out. And God forbid, there is coming out of that, because once you're invested in devotional service, you give up all your material things. And then, like Arjuna asked Krishna, like, what if you don't prosper in what if you don't prosper in spiritual life, and you don't prosper in material life, and you just, I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but you just perish like a riven cloud, something like that. And so I knew, like, yeah, this is a big decision. Once I'm into this, I know I'm getting into it. I know there's no coming back. But we got in the car, and I was thinking about it on the drive back home, and I really realized, yeah, there is really nothing better for me to do. I just wasn't satisfied with material life. I wasn't inspired in material life, and also, music was one big attachment for me. But I'd taken a class in college about, like, the music industry, intro to the music industry, something like that, and it just made me that class made me realize how nasty it is. Consumer, capitalist institutions meant for just catering to consumers in general is just a nasty field of exploitation. But I really realized that the music industry is no different. It's really, people get exploited like anything. And the artists themselves even get so exploited. And so I was really disheartened with the whole thing. And so I was like, I'll give up all this nonsense anyways. It wasn't such a hard decision to come to. It was a big decision, but the outcome of that decision was obvious. It was choosing either a bottomless pit of darkness or choosing some path with light at the end of the tunnel. So I was like, yeah, of course. This opportunity to practice Bhakti Yoga and the Association of Devotees, particularly in this Krishna Life ashram, was such a rare opportunity. And I felt like, I'd gone through all this suffering. I felt like everything in my life has led me to this point of accepting my real identity as a servant of Krishna, as a servant of God, my eternal identity, of, going through all these confusing years of aimless, teenage wasteland, just confusion, intoxication, madness, lust, running here and there, trying to chase pleasure, and then eventually coming to the point of, I want to be a servant of God. I've had enough of this, There was a clear, it was a clear 180 turn, a path that was completely open for me. And the devotees who I would be moving in with, they were willing to guide me through the whole thing, give me all the guidance I needed, work with me, help me work through all my difficulties. And I was like, wow, this is really a good opportunity. Everything was perfectly aligned. And so I remember I made the decision and I told Mahotsav Prabhu, I'll move in. But this album that I had been working on, this music, I was at the very end of doing it, and I was actually going to release the album that weekend, in a day or two after I got back. And so I was like, you know what, let me just wrap up my situation. I was very, I like to follow the principle of if I get something started or if I make a vow to do something, I'm gonna go through with it. So I didn't want to just abandon this thing I was working on for months and months and months. So I released the music, and I called it "This Project Is My Tissue," because that was kind of supposed to be some sort of deep message, ultimately nonsense, but this project is my tissue. It's the music was like a catharsis for me to throw all my snot into and just throw it away. And so that's the project was my tissue. I put out the album and just moved into the Brahmacharya ashram. Now, if I was a pure devotee, I would have probably just not released the album, because whoever does listen to that album, their material problems probably will increase. But anyways, me not being a pure devotee, I wanted that little bit of reputation of having this, deep message to everything I'm doing in my life. But, so I released the album. I had some weed left in my room, so I decided, okay, just one last time. So I rolled up a very big marijuana cigarette and ignited it in my backyard. And I was trying to listen to this music that I used to like, and I was trying to enjoy this one last joint, and I just was not feeling it. I had just got out of the Association of Devotees, and I was trying to go back into this zone of just being moded out, listening to stupid music, smoking weed. I was like, this is so dumb, this is so depressing. What am I doing? I'm hurting my body by inhaling this stuff. I'm making my mind really messed up and lazy and tired and tamasic, and I barely inhaled any of it, and I just threw it. I just couldn't care less anymore. So that happened, and then I moved into the Brahmacharya ashram and started my junior year of college. My parents, they were supportive of my decision to do this, and they continue to be very supportive because they're good parents, even though they don't have Vedic culture and Shastric knowledge. They're definitely good parents. They're good-hearted, and in that they just want to see me happy. And when they saw me slowly take up the process of Krishna consciousness, they realized that I was, in a much better place. I was much happier. And they saw I was happy with the devotees, and they liked that. So they fully supported my decision. Yeah, it was weird, and they always are asking me, when are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? But all in all, they are favorable to Krishna consciousness. So I'm very fortunate in that my transition from being a complete mlecha, yavana materialist into practicing devotional service in the brahmachari ashram was fairly smooth and easy. I know some devotees that, their parents disowned them and all sorts of crazy stuff. They had to drop out of school and renounce to a greater degree than I had to. So things were very smooth for me, actually. I wasn't, maybe I'm not so fixed up in that I could handle such a drastic shift, such a rough path, such a rough entrance into the path. Of course, everybody has a rough path, now or later. But yeah, of course, the story continues. In my life before Krishna consciousness, it feels like a story reflecting on it. And Akila Prabhu, the first devotee I really talked to, he would say that he would say about his own life. He would say I grew up in this crazy movie, this insane theater. He would say something like that. And it really does feel like that, looking back at my life. It's all just a story. It's all will of the wisp, or whatever it's called. It's just gone in thin air. And thankfully now I'm slowly being reestablished in my eternal spiritual position, and I'd like all the devotees to please bless me so I can continue this and not be pulled back, because that would be terrible. Yeah. Okay, Hare Krishna.